All right.
Hello and welcome to the Major League Rugby Offseason show. Hi, I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, your best place for rugby predictions and opinion, and I have my friend and expert across from America, Grant Cole. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, Paul, how are you doing tonight, man? Thanks for having me on.
It's night for you, daytime for me. What better way to spend your lunch hour than chatting rugby with a mate from around the world?
Exactly. Well, it's kind of my cocktail hour, your lunch hour.
So I thought I'd have a quickly just run overview of what happened last season for those that aren't aware of what Major League Rugby was. But yeah, 7 teams, including the one that where you're based in Houston.
Yep.
But mainly kind of on the eastern central part of, on the west and central part of America, the teams were based.
Yes, mostly in the West, mostly on the West, but it wasn't that way. It wasn't really planned that way. That's just where the money came up.
I think one of the other comments, it's also where the stadiums were available as well.
That's true. And there are stadiums available on the East Coast. It's just not that it's just harder to deal with the guys that you've got to rent from than it is to deal with the folks that you can when you build your own stadium.
And one of the things we've found out, and actually we'll talk about building our own stadiums later, but one of the things that if you look at somewhere like the Gallagher Premiership, having your own stadium is a recipe for success financially, which makes you sustainable. Which if you have to rent someone else's stadium, if we look at someone like London Irish, it becomes much harder to generate that kind of income.
That's exactly right.
So those teams: Seattle, San Diego, New Orleans, Houston, Austin, Glendale, and Utah. And on the pitch, basically, Glendale, they've been around for a long time, early favourites pre-season, and delivered.
Yeah, Glendale's a pretty successful team overall. If you look at full body of work, not just this year, and everything that's come out of Glendale has been pretty successful. This year, last year Glendale pushed everybody, which was expected considering the talent they had, and in the end, they got to the final, but at the final, their lack of depth, I think, showed at the final, and it basically they just got out coached, if you ask me, and which is amazing because your coach, the Seattle coach, was on the field playing the whole time, and I was just amazed that he did that good of a job. So that's Phil Mack out of Canada was their coach. He was also their scrum half. And like I said, I'm just amazed how well he coached that team last year and getting them to the final and getting them to win. You got to really give credit to Phil Mack for the coaching effort there, and then the talent that they had was supreme too.
Yeah, a team that Seattle have historically been part of the DC or the Canadian setup league because they're closer.
British Premiership, British Columbia Premiership, yes.
That's the one. And so they had a big Canadian influence, which was a problem for them at the beginning of the season because their intended head coach, had visa issues and couldn't come back and coach them, which was why a lot of us thought they would struggle.
He didn't have the, if the story's correct, he did not have the resume to get a P1 visa into the U.S. and be a coach, and he really didn't have the resume to get an O1 if I understand everything correctly, but I could be wrong on that. But he just didn't have the resume to get the proper visa, and that just means he couldn't be an American coach and holding down a job, and that was the problem there.
But as you say, they overcame adversity to come second in the league in regular season and go on to win the final as well. So a successful season on the pitch. All the games happened, which we can't say the same for other setups who have tried to do professional rugby in the US before. They all happened when they said they were going to happen and where they said they were going to happen.
I got to say the three biggest influencers on Seattle, Phil Mack, of course, was a big influencer, but Ray Barkwell and Shalom Sunula really brought a lot of experience and maturity to that crew. And that really helped keep the team gelled together. So, when you have three big time guys like that who know how to keep a team together, and they're working real hard at it, even in a situation where when you don't have a coach, I would call that an adverse situation. I got to say that the whole thing rode on their backs, and that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and off the pitch also, Seattle were very successful in selling all their tickets. They sold out well. And again, say all the games happened where they said they were going to happen, when they said they were going to happen, which is unique and a great successful. We also saw some transparency from owners saying the issues they had on match days and how they're going to fix them. So it was, which I found refreshing as well.
I think one of the bigger successes that people aren't talking about, just because they don't really know that this is a success, is in America you have this thing called viewer to attendance ratio when it comes to selling your sport and anything you got to the broadcasters, right? And Major League Rugby did something last year that is being talked about in a big way, that because it's never been done before in America with any upstart sport. And that's that they came out in their first year out of the chute, they had a 50-to-1 viewership to attendance ratio across the board. Now 50-to-1, everybody's going, that means 50 people were watching for every one person that was in the stands. And that's what that really means, okay? But what that means in terms of broadcaster speak is that Major League Rugby came out in their freshman season and posted Major League Baseball and National Hockey League numbers for viewership to attendance ratios. And that speaks volumes to advertisers. And I don't really think that was something that the rugby gentry really understand how important that was. And viewership to attendance ratios is very important when you want to bring in higher dollar advertisers.
And I think, unsurprisingly, it's a very young sport in that kind of sense. It hasn't got there aren't a lot of people involved in the sport who understand the broadcast side of it necessarily.
That's true.
And we've seen the broadcast side of it totally messed up by USA Rugby with their via RIM and Rugby Channel.
We can talk about that all day, but
we could talk about that all day. But I guess the indication. All I'm trying to point out is that there's not many people who understand media and broadcast properly in rugby, because it's new on TV, especially for an American league to be on TV as well. The previous ones have tried to go via the social media route and failed. But to get on proper.
Well, you got to think Major League Rugby also went via the social media route to service their international fans. So I got to give them props there that trying to put it out on Facebook wasn't as successful as they wanted to. But then that's still a new thing to make sure you get it right. You really have to have some people who are in the know of how to stream on Facebook, and those people are few and far between, and when it comes to the high dollar thing of sports, it's just not an easy task to do. Now, you get a guy like Ryan Ginty and a couple others out there that really know how to do it. You put their name in the hat and get them in there, they'll make it happen for you. But those people just really haven't been found and sucked into the broadcasting sphere of Major League Rugby in order to make that work for them. Hopefully this year that'll change.
And as someone who broadcasts to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter simultaneously, hey, I could definitely help out there. But but those sort of for the international piece, but they didn't rely on that as that was a way of reaching people who they couldn't get to in other ways.
That's correct.
Whereas internally in the US, they got a proper they didn't have a product they could sell to Sky or BT in the UK really. In the first season, they had to prove themselves, and part of that proof would have been how many international viewers they could get on Facebook. That would be another way of selling to those broadcasters in the future, I presume.
Yes, that's correct.
But all in all, a successful first season. Nobody went under, and everything happened.
Yes, that's correct.
In some ways, perhaps too successful. I mean, we've had I reckon it's probably around about 10 players or so get scouted via the league and head overseas. So
And a lot of people are saying that's too successful, but I really don't think that's the case. Especially you look at a guy like Paul Mullen who got a ticket for 4 months to Newcastle. He'll be back over here in January to start the season up with the SaberCats once he gets done with his contract there. So some of those guys, they look at it, they go, oh, they're gone, they're not coming back. No, they are coming back. A lot of the guys that are over there are on short-term contracts, not on long-term contracts. Now, Campbell and Lasicki, both of those guys are over there on longer-term contracts. So the midfield will be a little bit easier to exploit against their teams. So, but when you look at some of the people that are coming in, I don't know. We've got some good talent out there that wasn't involved in the league last year, and I think that will be involved in the league this year. And I think we're going to see some young upstarts that are getting a chance to show their stuff.
So you're not worried by the fact that we've got 2 more teams joining in New York Rugby United and Ontario Arrows, and also losing a few players. You think the player depth is all going to be fine?
And the player depth is going to be fine for 2 reasons. Number one, each team's going to be allowed 10 foreigners on their side this year instead of 5. And Canadians and Americans will not be considered foreigners in either of those teams. So if Ontario Arrows want to pick up a couple of Americans, they won't be considered foreigners for an Ontario Arrows. And if any of the U.S. teams want to pick up some Canadians, those Canadians won't be counted as foreigners for their teams. So the talent base basically just got larger from that change. So a lot of people talk about the talent base maybe getting thin, and they don't realize that what the league did this year was actually enlarge the talent base almost twofold, with at the same time just adding 2 teams. So it's going to be a little harder to get into the league this year.
And then adding 2 more teams again in 2020. But if you, as you say, in Atlanta and Boston, but if you've doubled your player base, that's not going to be a problem either. You're still going to have plenty of players.
I think that's one of those things that people just aren't taking into mind is that change right there, those 2 changes, 10 players on each team, and on the Canadian teams, Americans aren't considered foreigners. On the American teams, Canadians aren't considered foreigners. That is, but as long as they can get a job in the States or in Canada, and they can work based on the labor laws there, then they're going to be able to get on those teams. And for Canadians, that's not a real hard thing to do in the U.S.
And with only one team in Canada, there's plenty of players, plenty of a whole national team nearly available.
I don't even see why they wouldn't put at least half of their under-20s and half of their national team on that side. I think something like 8 of the starters on the Canadian national team are playing overseas, so that gives Bill Webb and his crew a lot of depth that they can pull from still. And I know that Silverthorne, he likes to make sure, Coach Silverthorne really likes to make sure that he plays a young team and is developing a young team. So I think you're going to see a lot of the under-20s out of him, and they've got the whole of the CRC to pull from up there as well.
Yep. Which is the CRC, for those who don't know, is the Canadian National Tournament.
Canadian Rugby Championship.
Yep. But congratulations, sir. You have a new job.
Yes, I do. I am basically the general manager, the manager of the D1 men's team at West Houston Lions. West Houston has a D1 team this year, did not have one last year. And we're also that means we're going to have 3 clubs. Most of you guys consider down south, y'all consider it grades. We have 3 grades, first, second, and fourth in this club, and hopefully next year we'll add the 3rd grade, and that way we'll have all 4 grades covered. In the U.S., we call them divisions, Division 1, 2, and Division 1, 2, and 3 can compete for national championships. 4th divisions are basically social or development teams. And what they do is that's just in the Texas Rugby Union, and is where we compete for our D4 and then go from there. So we'll have a first and second division, and then a 4th division team as well. And I think we have enough youth on the team that we've recruited that we're also going to be able to field an under 23s team about 4 or 5 games.
And what you've kind of haven't touched on there is that this team, this club has very close ties with the Houston SaberCats.
So beginning in February, March last year, Coach Fitzpatrick and I began to see that there was not enough playing time for the associate players in the D2 teams that were in Houston. He was allocating his associate players to the D2 teams in Houston. There were 4 of them: Houston Athletic Rugby Club, Houston United Rugby Team, the Woodlands Rugby Club, and West Houston Rugby Club. And he was allocating his players out to those 4 teams, but they just weren't getting the kind of playing time and the level of playing time that they needed. And it's not going to change going into this year. So the question was, how do we create a D1 team that these associate players can play on, right? Well, you don't have enough associate players to complete a D1 team, right? So you needed a club to basically work with. And 2 of the clubs involved, they didn't really take to the allocation process that well. And allocation is something that for the U.S. is a new issue. 2 clubs did understand allocation and they welcomed it, but one of the clubs is not yet developed to the point to where they're going to get a D1 team ready anytime soon. And one of the clubs has a strategic plan that says, hey, we're going to have a D1 team in 4 years. And that was West Houston. So Fitzy went to West Houston and we talked to them and basically said, hey, what do you need to have a D1 team next year? And they put numbers and needs on the table, and then Fitzy and I looked at each other. I said, I can do that. He goes, I can do this. And voila, we were past negotiations and then talking about what's the paperwork we got to do to fill out for a D1 team. And we came down to the 11th hour with the Red River Rugby Conference, but we got it done. And then it was recruiting time for me, because that's basically what my job is as manager, is to basically make sure we get enough players in here to fill out these teams. And I've been really happy with the numbers we've had the last 4 practices. We've had 4 practices so far this year, and I've been really happy with the numbers. They've been higher numbers than the team traveled with to any game last year. So we're really happy about that. We've also got a lot of youth on the team. Just got through counting before we took this call. And right now there are 23 players under the age of 23 on the team and 27 under the age of 25. So there's a lot of youth on this team.
So basically what we're seeing here is these new professional setups working closely with the local clubs, and in Houston's case, choosing one to accelerate their development with both cash and also resources, human resources as well, to help.
That's correct.
Which is helping growth. It's not just a professional layer that's sat on top deciding to cream off the crop and ignore the grassroots. It's working with them, which is great to see, because there's yourself funded through that, but also your head coach is going to be the skills coach for Houston. So again, he's going to know. He's obviously going to have a very close working relationship with Fitzy, and be able to tell him which players are doing well, and Fitzy can give him also feedback on the players that come up and he sends down, which is going to be a close working relationship.
So that's an interesting story, how we came to find Paul Emmerich as our coach. Paul and I are very close to each other, friendship and business wise, and he's got some things he's doing business wise that he's trying to get a footprint in the market down here in Houston on. And I have this long list of potential coaches that I had built up that Fitzy and I were going through. And Paul, for whatever reason, was not on my list. I have no clue why he was on my list. I still don't know to this day why I didn't put him on my list, but he should have been on my list. And I'm on the phone with him in August or end of July, and we had just lost our prime candidate to another team who basically outbid us for him. And I'm talking to Paul, and I cussed, pretty loudly on the phone, and I just went into a cussing fit. He goes, "What's wrong?" I said, "I can't believe I haven't thought of you for this, Paul." He goes, "What?" I went, and then I told him what it was, right? I told him the opportunity, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome." And it is an awesome opportunity for him. And what I didn't know is that Paul was also in what we call the SOAR program here. And the SOAR program is for up and coming coaches where the USA Rugby develops their next level national team coaches. So this is, these guys get into the All-American setup. They get into the national team setup, the shadow coaches. It's part of Gary Gold's development program for his national team coaches. And Paul's in that program. So not only is Paul already a co-head coach at the Air Force Academy, 53 caps in 15s, 21 sevens tours that he's done, sevens tours that he's done, 3 Rugby World Cups, a stint with the Barbarians, played for the Wasps, played for Ulster, which, Ulster pretty much puts them in with Houston if you know anything about what's going on too. And playing for the Wasps pretty much puts you in with Houston too, because we have an Irish contingent at Houston Sabercats that are all Ulstermen, and we have an English contingent there that are all Wasps fans. So he ticked off all the boxes basically and could come in as a skills coach, which was something that Fitzy was looking for, but he didn't have. So Houston Sabercats are able to put up 2/3 of the cash for him to pay his salary, and the West Houston's able to put up the other third, and everything worked out the way where it goes. I was also able to convince Kenneth Hepburn, who retired from the Sabercats as a prop last year at the end of the season. He's going to come be a forwards coach with us. I found, and I kid you not, this is his real name. I found a guy named Gary Owen.
Okay. Don't tell me he's a kicking coach.
And he is actually my kicking coach. Yes, he really is. Gary Owen played for Bridgend and Neath in the 60s and 70s. And he was telling me when I know his wife from work. She and I work together intercompany. She represents one of my clients. And we met at the Rugby World Cup. She sees me, grabs me, brings me over to introduce me to him. We're talking, and this is in San Francisco in July, and he just wants to get back into rugby. So I'm helping him get back in the rugby. And turns out this was a guy who regularly went up against guys like Barry John and Phil Bennett. That was his opposition. So Gareth Edwards, these were the guys he played against on a daily basis back then. And so this is the guy that's our kicking coach now. He's no slouch, right? And then we've got Hendrik Volshank, who's a halfback coach for us. Henny is a game warden here in Texas. He's also been they don't call him a game warden down in South Africa, but he was the equivalent of a game warden in South Africa before he moved to Texas. And a little thing about game wardens in Texas, trivia here for you, Paul. In Texas, a game warden has no jurisdictional boundaries within the state of Texas. He can make an arrest for any crime anywhere. Okay.
So if someone throws a punch on the pitch, he can go and arrest the person for assault.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's. I know that sounds goofy. that sounds goofy, but that's exactly that's a real scenario there. And then of course, Neil Riley is our director of rugby. Neil played for Rugby Football Club in Rugby UK when they were first in the Premiership back in '95. So he's a former professional prop as well. And then we have Neil Doherty and Daniel O'Donnell, who have been with the club for a long time. Great coaches. Neil Doherty coaches the forwards. Dan coaches the back. Dan's played fly half and fullback for 30 some odd years in the U.S. all over. And Neil's an Irishman who has been playing flanker for all his life. And he's also he's also a chef, an executive chef, actually, here in Houston. So his nickname is Chef. And Neil Riley's nickname is Rhino, so we don't call him Neil, we call him Chef and Rhino.
So what I'm hearing from this is that even to run a semi-pro team, you need a staff of about 7 or so coaches and administration people as a minimum.
And you've got that exactly right. We've got another coach that prefers me not to use his name, but he's also our law coach because he's a referee.
Right.
So,
okay. You got and that makes a lot of sense, having someone to come in and be able to referee games or referee scrums and scrimmages, and practice games, so you can run through scenarios and players can understand what they can.
And our guys get a lot of work on breakdown scenarios and also on the new contact laws, the tackle laws and how they're being interpreted. So that's a really good thing that this coach gives us. And then one of the things I'm introducing, the club had a thing called a team coordinator last year for all of their different teams because they run teams U5 all the way up to veteran men.
Yep.
So they had 195 club members last year, and this year we're going to have about 250. And I brought in the concept of actual team manager, and that's where I come in. And then I've got 2 team managers that work with me for the D2 and the D4 team, and our job is basically make sure the coaches can coach and we can do all the stuff like taking attendance, making sure everybody's registered right and all the other stuff that goes along with running a rugby club that's not coaching on the field.
So yeah, but you're going to be booking flights, coaches for away trips, hotels,
hotel
kind of stuff as well.
Name it. Yep, and all things.
Which will fall under you. And being D1, that's, as you say, you play for national championships, so you are going to have some pretty long haul trips to in the
so. One of the things that changed last year in D1 in the Red River, it was Glendale Merlins, Dallas Quins, Dallas Reds, Austin Huns, Austin Blacks, and Little Rock Stormers. Little Rock has since dropped out of the Red River, and they're going to play in Heart of America now. And so when we stepped up to the plate, that was a very welcome change. Plus, San Antonio Armadillos are coming in to be a D1 team as well. So now we've got a full contingent. Everybody can play everybody twice. That gives us our 12 games a year for a minimum to go to the playoffs. You have to play 12 Division I level matches of some sort to go play for the playoffs. Previous to this year, there weren't. Your home and away only gave you 10 matches. Now it gives us 12, everybody 12, so everybody can make their matches and no problem.
And I think you mentioned there was an Austin team in there, so they're associated with Austin Elite?
No, they're not. I know that there are players from both the Huns and the Blacks that played on the Austin Elite previous year before, but from what I understand, and I don't know the details on this, so I'm sorry I don't have them. There's not as much connection as there could be.
I think that's one of the things we're going to see is that all the organisations are at different levels of maturity, have slightly different requirements, and we'll be prioritising things differently.
I mean, if you look at the Seawolves, their manager, Kevin Flynn, is also the director at Seattle Saracens.
Yep.
So there's a close relation there. You go down to San Diego, there's a lot of OMBAC ties to the San Diego team, but there's also a lot of Chula Vista ties to the team. So they have 2 different organizations they can pull from there, and that's how they work with that organization. Now,
and
I think
also the USA Sevens is based down there as well?
That's Chula Vista.
Chula Vista, okay. Yep.
Yeah, so, and then now with Stewart coming in as their forwards coach this year, he'll be able to pull a lot of different players from around Southern California as he is a very brilliant identifier of talent, and he knows all of the talent in SoCal. So
there are. I guess the story is there's links. The other big thing for Houston is, unfortunately, because of some environmental issues, well, basically flooding, they couldn't start building their stadium when you wanted, but you're going to have a new stadium to move into as well.
Yeah, so last year after Harvey, anything that was along the Sims Bayou that had a construction permit, the permits were suspended until the study on how they were going to widen and deepen Sims Bayou was finished. The Houston SaberCats their location is 100 yards from Sims Bayou. I mean, it sits right there. Now, it's 12 foot above top of banks. So it's got an unusual height advantage. So not only would Sims Bayou have to get out of their banks, but it'd have to get out of their banks and get 12 feet above flood stage, which is huge if you look at the area that entails. That means that there's a lot of places down there, and we're talking about right around 4,000 acres that would have to flood over 12 feet before the stadium was engulfed.
That's a lot of water.
So, yeah, that's a lot of water. It's basically not something that's going to happen. But yeah, the stadium's getting built. You can go to the Facebook page of Houston SaberCats, and they post some overhead views of the different buildings. One of the things I noticed on it yesterday or this week were they have finished flattening the surface for the two side fields, and which means they're about ready to put down the grass. The grass is already grown, from what I understand. It's got about 2¼ inches of root depth already, and it's just ready to be rolled up and transported up. What they do is they start about 1 a.m, cutting and rolling up the grass, throwing it on the trucks, driving it up from Brazoria County, which is about 50 miles south of here, and they drive it up from there, take it off, roll it out. And they roll it out exactly how it was rolled up. It's in about 24-inch wide swaths that are rolled up and then just rolled right back out.
And so basically it's going to be ready for the new season.
The grass is ready now. The grass is beautiful.
No, I meant the stadium.
Like 10 acres of grass down there that are ready to go.
Because I think one of the problems Houston had last year was it was quite a long way out of town, wasn't it? I think their venue, so their new venue will be much better as well.
Yeah, sure. Well,
we're seeing infrastructure. Well, there's not only just playing improvements, we're seeing infrastructure improvements as well in the league.
Quite a long way out of town is a kind of a misnomer in Houston. We're a city the size of Rhode Island, with 7.5 million people in it. Okay, so when a Houstonian says, "Hey, I've got to go somewhere in Houston," that usually means at least 30 minutes of driving, if not more. And my house is 4.5 miles from my work, and on a good day, on a very, very good day, I can make it in 12 minutes.
4.5 miles in 12 minutes. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's slow.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good day. Most days it takes me 20 to 25 minutes to get to work on that 4.5 miles, and I don't have to get on the highway at all. It's almost a straight shot. I'm out of my neighborhood. I make a left turn, I make a right turn, and I'm at work. But it's 4.5 miles, and it can be 20 to 25 minutes. So yeah, that's how Houston is. It's just a sprawled out city. And, when you're a Houstonian, you're kind of used to it. You just figure it out.
Well,
so Sugarland, Sugarland was 18.5 miles drive from my house, generally a 35-minute drive, and most of it on the highway, even though it was 35 minutes.
Yep.
And then, so it wasn't, it's what we call just a regular drive.
Okay, so it wasn't too bad then.
No, if you were coming from over in Kingwood, you had to plan something because that's the opposite side of the city from Sugarland. But most people that went to the games came from over on that side of the city. But anyway, and then when they moved it into Dyer Stadium is a very central location. It's at an intersection of two major highways, so it's very easy to get to as long as you know where you're going and plan it out. Now, with where they're going to be on 288, which is the south, what they call the South Freeway, and it's going out to Pearland, which is just outside of town, but in Brazoria County, outside of Harris County. You're closer to Pearland than you are to Houston at the stadium. But the stadium where it's at, it's on some old grounds that Houston Community College used to own. And then 2 years ago, 2016, there was a big investigation and breakout that found that there was a lot of lands being used fraudulently by some HCC employees, some Houston Community College employees, and those lands were seized, and the easiest place for the city to give them to was the Houston Sports Authority for Hull because the tax revenue issues would be less to deal with. These lands were part of that deal.
Okay, so it was designated to be a sports.
Yes.
So it's not just going to be rugby. There's other things around there as well, which makes it a bit of a sports hub.
Yeah, and if you go to if you're on Google and you go to Houston Sports Park on Google, and then just look directly southeast of that sports park, cattywampus from it, there's a little patch of ground north of Sims Bayou, and that's where it's going to be at. It's right at 40 acres right there.
So we've got, in this off-season, so we've got the extra teams coming in, we've got teams growing their club relationships and their infrastructure. And then also, it's interesting that in Europe and in the sort of old rugby world, we call it pre-season, but you guys are calling it, you have an exhibition season.
We call it exhibition season, pre-season. It doesn't matter. Your exhibition season for, I think what they're going to call it this year is pre-season, okay. And that's going to be the first 3 weeks of January. And then we're going to also see teams playing in November and December. You see Glendale and Ontario playing now. It's a little early for them, but that's the best time for them to get in for the weather issues up there. So
yeah, I was going to say the games we're already seeing. Ontario, even though there'll be a brand new team, they've been playing games now for several months. So they have a whole team together, and they've been playing exhibition games. They've also joined in different sort of mini competitions as well. New York United even lent players last season to some teams, so they're ready as well. So,
and you should see that happening with Boston this year and with Atlanta as they get players built up in their systems. They should be. I think Atlanta will be working with New Orleans. There's already a lot of ties there between. And if I'm correct, there's a lot of Tiger Rugby backing for the Atlanta team, and there's a lot of Tiger Rugby ties at New Orleans already. So you should see a lot of working together there. Boston and New York, I expect them to work together this year so that some of the Boston players can come in and help be associate players for New York. I don't think New York's going to get off the ground as well as they would like. Right now you're looking at a lot of the foreign players coming in plus the best of Old Blue and Nyack. But they're going to need some extra depth there to push them, and I think bringing in some of the players from Boston, such as Chris Frazier, and I can't remember the name of that flanker that I like so much from up there, but he was he always impresses me when he plays for Mystic River. So, but there's a series of folks up there that can bolster that New York team and that running team.
And whilst these are separate entities, it's good to see them working together for the good of to help grow the league. And for those that don't know, in Tiger, sort of coaching academies around for quite a few years in America has been a very driving force of part of the growth of rugby in the States. So it's unsurprising to see them involved with a couple of the clubs.
That's correct.
As well. And Old Blue and Nyack, as you say, are two. Very long history of clubs in New York.
If you're pulling from Nyack and Old Blue, you're pulling some of the best players in the city, in the nation there, in my opinion. There are some really great players there, and if Mike Tolkien is still involved with the running crew, then I think that they'll be able to pull in some of the better players, and there'll be a force to be reckoned with the first year. James Kennedy's probably going to say, hey, they're going to be the best team out there, but there's a bunch of people with some experience under their belt and some things to say about that, right? You look at the SaberCats last year; they were in last place in the league, right? 1-7, 13, 9-2 overall on the year. That was their overall record. And a lot of people say, hey, we're not going to count those matches that they played in preseason, but you know what? They lost to Uruguay's national team by 9 points on their third game out in the year. And yeah. Say that again and listen to yourself when you say it, right? That's saying something in my opinion. There's not a whole lot of teams that can say, hey, we played a Tier 2 national team and held them to a 9-point win. It's just not a whole lot of people can say that.
Yeah, no, it's the...
And then the other thing, I think I've talked to you about this before. Sorry, Paul. The 7 games that West Houston lost, or that Houston SaberCats lost, the 7 games they lost in MLR were lost by an average of 7 points apiece. The 2 games that were lost by more than 7 points were against Seattle and Glendale, and they were by 13 points apiece. So there's a lot of people that said that Houston SaberCats were the best, worst team in the league because everything was so close. They just, so that's one of the reasons for this D1 club coming up. Fitzy knew that he had some, high quality players that just weren't getting pushed for position. So they weren't staying on top of their, you've got this down in, especially in the Naki down there. You've got it where, heck, if you're playing fly half for the Naki today, there's a couple of 3 guys out there that are trying to beat you out, and you've got to play your best because you have one misstep, one drop pass, and coach would drop you and bring one of them in and give them a run at it, right? And the SaberCats just didn't have that ability last year. And now one of the reasons we're doing this West Houston D1 team is to give them that ability, give them that experience to where they're watching all of these players coming up that, okay, now I got to play. And
yeah, and that's what you were saying there about New York is that they is that second tier pushing the first tier. Their first tier may be good enough, but are they being pushed when there are a few injuries? Will they? How will they cope?
And if Runny pulls from Mystic River, Old Blue, Nyack, Boston Wolfhounds, and Rocky Gorge, then they're going to be pulling from a few teams that have got some really good players and that are even in the wings that are good players. So yeah, they can pull players from these teams, but they're not really going to deplete them because these teams have second sides that are just as good as most teams' first sides in that Division One.
But even
you look at Mystic River last year.
The setup you've got now down in Austin is you've got players who know the systems, but are now getting game time, quality game time to push those players. Whereas those links and the systems and stuff won't be in place for New York. Or for Austin, I think, not Austin, sorry, or for Atlanta, and they are going to get. They do have to remember they are first season teams coming into a league where there are a whole bunch of teams who have experience already and institutional knowledge as to how to play or how to deal with the travel, the play, and all of that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I think they need to not over set expectations to their fans.
Well, one of the things in Atlanta that's really helped this year, not only is Colton Carriaga doing a great job coaching at life, but former Eagle Eagle stalwart, in my opinion, Phil Till is coaching Atlanta Old White. And that's a big deal. I think it's Old White. It may be the Quins, but if I get it wrong, guys, I'm sorry. So don't slay me because I got it wrong. I don't have my reference in front of me. But Phil Till's also coaching down there in Atlanta in a D1, in a D2 setup. They should be a D1, but they just don't have enough D1 teams in the South for Atlanta teams to be a D1 team. But Phil Till's down there, and that means you've got a guy who knows what it takes to play at that next level, coaching these players. So that's going to be a very similar setup to what we have here in West Houston once Atlanta gets off the ground.
And one of the things you mentioned there is in passing is Life. I mean, Life is one of the top university rugby setups. Just for those again who don't follow American rugby, and I've got a shout out for Black, White, and Red Eye, the American Rugby podcast, who are based down in Atlanta.
They're going to be loving this.
So they're going to be loving the fact they've got
Preston and Warren got to be happy as clams, man.
I've not listened to their podcast since the announcement, but I will be listening to that on one of my road trips.
Monday night, yeah, right.
they are going to be very happy. They have been quietly, well, not noisily, trying to get themselves a team down there.
Yes.
So yeah, and if you want to know about American rugby, they're a good place. That's a good podcast to listen to.
Oh yeah, Red, White, and Black Eye podcast, the American Rugby podcast. Preston and Warren they really have done some yeoman's work out there getting their podcast together and making sure people know what's going on in parts of the states.
Yep. And if you are a college team, they also like you to send the college scores so they can give you a shout out. So do that as well. I think that's most of what's going on in the off season for Major League Rugby. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, you haven't asked about the draft, and that's interesting.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Enlighten me. I haven't heard about the draft.
So I don't know all the details, but the MLR draft was this past week. Okay.
So is this looking at? So is this so players from university only can put themselves forward for the draft, or any player?
No, it's a little weird how it's done. I'm pretty sure, talking to some coaches about it, it's not exactly universally accepted in a happy case, but I know that they accepted it because that was the plan going forward, and they're going to do it this year. And if they don't like it, they're going to review it and try and tweak it for the year after that. But what they did, and this is going to sound crazy to you, Paul, okay? It's going to sound crazy to your listeners. What they did is they took all of the associate players from the previous season and all of the All-American players who have matriculated out of college and put them into a list that any of the coaches can pull from as long as those players agree to play for their city. So basically, it was instead of what they did last year where the teams went out and brought their own players in and then contracted them. Well, the league owns the contracts, right?
Yep.
That's how this works. The league has the contracts. When you pay into the league as a league owner, what you're paying into is to pay for the logistics and the salary of the players you're going to be have on your team. So the league is actually saying, "Hey."
So just as a sort of update for you. So basically, one of the things that the league has done to make sure that players get paid and aren't out of pocket is each team has to put up their entire season salaries, pay that in upfront to the league. The league then owns the players' contracts and take that money to pay the players. So the clubs are still paying the players, but it's via the league.
And then the clubs also have to put up their estimated logistic cost in an escrow account so that those costs come out of those. That way the money's already there. There's no team that's actually going to end up not being able to travel because they don't have the money. If the money's not in the bank before the season starts, they don't, they're not a team. And so when you hear them announce a team, that money's in the bank.
So basically, a team cannot use next season's ticket sales to fund some of the trips at the end of the season. They have to have the money all up front, which is it's a chunk of cash.
Yes, it is a chunk of cash. So it's a pretty smart way of doing it, if you ask me. I always thought that was probably the most ingenious part of it because it dealt with some of the major issues that have plagued USA Rugby, club rugby in the U.S. for years. And it dealt with them up front. So I really thought those were some of the more important things that they did.
But sorry, going back to the draft. So there's this big list of all the and an associate player is a player that basically is
not on a full-time contract.
Yeah, they're not on a full-time contract. So they've got to have a job. So interestingly enough, someone now who was an associate player for Houston could have Seattle saying, "Hey, we'd like to draft you," and he's like, "Well, but I'm a doctor down here, or a bricklayer or whatever."
Precisely the case.
My job, I've got I can't afford to move to quit my job and move to Seattle, which seems it seems like a very strange, unless they are offering full-time contracts to all these guys drafted. That seems very strange.
The deal with the draft is if there's a player in the draft that's an associate player from your team, so. I don't know names, but let's say Paul Baines was an associate player with the SaberCats last year, and I'm Fitzy.
Fantastic.
Okay, yeah, you go. and I think Paul Baines would be a great full-time contract for us, and we probably need to do that to keep him with us. So before the draft happens, as long as I sign you or get you in negotiations for a full-time contract, your name's out of the draft.
Right, okay.
Okay? But if you're not in negotiations for a full-time contract or haven't been signed to one yet, then your name is in the draft. If you were an associate player. Now, if you were a full-time player last year and you're still going to be contracted this year because most of last year's contracts were 2-year contracts, then you're probably going to stay full-time contract this year. That won't change. However, that is changing for a couple players because Hanko Hermischweiss has been released from his contract with Austin and has been contracted full-time with Glendale next year.
Okay.
Which, Glendale lost Fig, probably one of their star players last year. He decided he didn't want to play in the MLR anymore and went back home to Australia and just said, hey, I'm not going to do it again. He wasn't really satisfied with the process. And you're going to have that, players that aren't satisfied with the process, right?
Yeah,
not everybody gets what they want out of this. And that's one of the things I've said about pro rugby in America have I been talking about this for 10 years now? I've been saying this for 10 years now. When it comes, not everything we're going to do in pro rugby is going to be how everybody likes it. It's just going to be however the businessmen who own the teams and run the clubs are going to want it done. If they think it needs to be done that way, that's how it's going to be done. And really, the rest of us, the fans, if we don't like the business end of it, we're kind of SOL.
That's interesting because Hanko Hermischweiss is one of the sort of biggest or up and coming big names in American rugby to be released. I mean, he's a guy who would put bums on seats in Austin. So that's interesting that he's moved up to Glendale. I don't know if
Glendale has issues with putting bums on seats too, right? So they need all that they can there. I mean, they've got a stadium, they've got an established culture. No reason why they shouldn't be selling out every game.
Yep. Seattle's shown it can be done. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so all right, so there has been a draft. So if you are drafted, do you get a full-time contract or are you still an associate?
You're probably an associate player if you're drafted, which means you're going to get at minimum $15 an hour, which was raised up from $12 an hour last year due to California labor laws and minimum wage laws.
Right. Okay.
So basically they're using, just like most companies in America do, they try to use the most strict law on the book labor-wise to direct their human resources. In this case, for the league, because the league is a national league, they're basically using the California law for minimum wage for this type of player, for this type of laborer.
Yep.
To govern them, and that's $15 an hour.
So as I say, it's going to be difficult for you to move across the country unless you're fairly young for these kind of things, which I guess is why you've got all the college players in there who won't necessarily have the same ties that the older guys will have. But okay, interesting. We'll see how that pans out. I hadn't heard about the draft. It's not like NFL.
They did not, they didn't broadcast it that much. And, I had to actually talk to a bunch of people in Utah and in Colorado because Fitzy would not give me a damn thing on it. This guy's in my house. I'm feeding him all the time, and he wouldn't tell me anything about it. So I had to go to other sources to find out about it.
After he'd been, he still didn't tell you the results.
What?
Before he went or after he went?
No, he wouldn't tell me about how the process was going. The only thing I knew that he was in draft week was when I called and said, "You doing all right?" He goes, "Oh, no, mate, it's just real busy this week because it's draft week." Oh, okay. Well, I knew it was draft week, but I didn't. So that's one of the reasons why I wasn't bothering him. But like when I queried him about it, he was real cagey. Wouldn't let me know anything. So I had to go fish out all of my sources from elsewhere because here it is. My best friend won't tell me what he's doing in the draft, basically. So that was pretty, I don't know, for me, that was pretty, what are we doing here, man?
So interesting. There you go. So there has been a draft, but it's all been a bit hush hush. Well, okay. Maybe not everything's as transparent as we know, but there we go.
Well, I think it's because they didn't want people to, they're managing expectations, if you ask me. Because when you hear draft, you think NBA, NFL draft in America, okay? And this is not that kind of draft.
No,
it's a draft.
You're not getting future franchise named players
Could be.
through this.
It's possible, but you probably not. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not going to hit the ground running. It's not like someone like when LeBron James gets, or more my kind of era of when Shaquille O'Neal got drafted. He changed an entire organization. One of these guys getting drafted is not going to change these organizations at this stage.
Yeah, correct.
So cool. Any other things I've missed, or is that pretty much the off season?
No, I think you've got it pretty good. It's going to be interesting as to what happens. I think Ontario is going to be a lot stronger team this year than anybody else in the league anticipates. And if you ask me, Ontario is going to be the team you have to beat this year if you want to make the final.
Wow, and that's and we're talking about an expansion franchise there. So that's
but that's an expansion franchise. But I got to watch Ontario play up close last year against Houston, and that was a great match. And those guys are serious. These guys have been playing some really hard rugby for a lot of years, and they're not, they're not slacking off. These guys, they come into it knowing the travel cost already. They know, the cost on the body it takes to travel. You talk to any of the players last year that were new to the league. One of the things they said is that the biggest issue was traveling and then getting your body and your mind back into gameplay on a travel date. You're going across the country on this. You read Richie McCaw's book about and he talks about the rigors of traveling from New Zealand to Australia or New Zealand to South Africa for the Sanzar events, and how much that took out of players and how you had to plan meticulously for that in order to make sure everything went right. And, that's a lot more travel than what these guys are doing, but it's still, travel is travel, and it's a hard thing to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to catch out in New York, to be honest. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how they go. We would point out the team with the smallest and shortest exhibition season or pre-season last year won the whole thing. So maybe
But you also, as you point that out, remember that so many of their players were playing in the BC Cup Premiership just weeks before their exhibition season started. So, is that true? Yeah, they did. But, these guys were playing right up until the start of the season.
And a lot of them have been playing against each other for many years. They actually pretty knew each other much better than they weren't a
well, and if you look at all the players that came from the Saracens that were on the Seattle Seawolves teams, and then you look at who'd been coaching them the last 4 years before that, any hints?
Wouldn't it be Mac by any chance?
No, it'd be Fitzpatrick, Coach Fitzpatrick.
Oh, okay. Who then moved down to you guys? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about it, a lot of those players came up under him for the last 4 years, and then they went over to the Seawolves. So, a lot of the Seawolves' success comes off of his back. So
there you go. So Seawolves won it because of the Houston SaberCats coach.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that he had a factor in it. I would say that the Seattle Seawolves won it because of Phil Mack's coaching and leadership.
Absolutely. I was just
if you're going to give a reason to it that needs to shine out there, and don't get me wrong, Paul, I hated Phil Mack for years because he was always beating us in sevens. I hated him with a blue-heeled passion. But watching what he did this year, I was really impressed with him, and I got to give him all props for what happened.
Yeah, and I've just gone blank, but talking to the guy who does the Seawolf podcast, he's the same. He's like, I've got to cheer for this Canadian guy. This doesn't feel right. It's fun what club rugby brings us. Thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Paul, for having me.
And folks, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all of that kind of stuff down below, and stay in touch because we'll be talking about MLR obviously when the season gets going again next year.